most shrubs are not blooming in July. So there's kind of it's kind of right around the same time, I guess, as the sourwoods. There's a little bit of extra nectar there for the bees. It attracts butterflies, and really just for the fragrance of this. It sort of spreads from the bottom, forms a nice little clump. Comes in a range of sizes too. Oh, sorry?
I would say the range of sizes, I've got 3 which are approaching 8 feet.
Yep. The wild one, just a straight Summersweet, is a beast. If you just go with the straight species, Clethra alnifolia, that thing is 8 feet or taller. It's just gigantic. It spreads all over the place. I sell a lot of those, mainly the species I sell to conservation groups or to projects that are focusing on, having straight species. Usually at the retail level or for home gardens, it's one of the several varieties that are available. Hummingbird is the dwarf one. It still retains the white flowers that are, that you see in nature. But hummingbird and also 16 candles, they max out around 3 feet tall. So a lot more manageable in the home garden. A lot of us don't have room for an 8-foot shrub. So hummingbird it's been around forever. It's a tried and true dwarf variety of Summersweet. Really, really easy to grow. You could plant this thing upside down and it would still grow. You cannot kill this plant. With pretty much with any planting, we recommend modifying the soil just a little bit with a composted pine bark. Nature's Helper is a really good product that's available at most big box stores. Most things that you take from a nursery container and you put into the clay, they might struggle a little bit. If you just adapt it right there in that planting hole, you're going to have success. Just 50-50 mix with the composted pine bark, get some mulch on top, and clay can be troublesome. Most of us are probably fine in the clay. You usually see it growing in areas where there's a lot of moisture and it's used to there not being a ton of oxygen in the soil, and it still does fine. So just with any plant though, you'll want to it is deciduous. It has a really beautiful yellow fall color. I mean, like bright yellow. If you plant it next to something that has a red or an orange, I had a planting that I saw one time where it was, there was the Summersweet and they had some Fothergilla behind it, and it was the bright yellow and the neon orange, and it was just absolutely stunning. Oh goodness.
They're all over in my garden.
Yeah, they're awful, and they serve a purpose. I do understand. I guess they're not awful. That challenge, I'm one of the only people that I know in my direct area that doesn't have a problem with the moles and the voles, but I have a lot of cats, and the cats help. I don't know of any specific plants besides, what is it, the castor bean plant. I mean, there are certain things you can plant in the area that are supposed to deter them. As far as, native plants or plants in general, that's a tough one. And I know the castor bean is a little big, so there isn't really room in gardens for that. I have heard planting that near your garden spaces is supposed to keep them from, visiting the area. So that might possibly be an option. This plant does grow pretty quickly though, so maybe it would be able to keep up. But the one on the bottom, the pink one, is the cultivar Ruby Spice, and it's just the pink flowered variety. Same bloom time. That one gets a little bit bigger. This is a 6-foot plant. So a little bit bigger. You have a range of sizes, a couple different colors, and this is just a really tough plant. If you have somewhere in the garden, it can take sun or shade. It'll flower in the shade. It'll do fine in the sun. You can put it just about anywhere, and it's going to thrive. And sweet shrub. Sweet shrub is another one. We probably have all seen this growing wild, all over the place. I've got about a 1/4 acre of just a dense sweet shrub stand behind my nursery. This plant is just tough. I've seen it sprouting up out of old buildings and just thriving, covered in flowers, and just, you can put it just about anywhere. It's really drought tolerant once it's established. The flowers are really quite lovely. The fragrance is very tropical, fruity. seems to get stronger in the evening. I think it has something to do with the relationship with the beetle that pollinates the flower. So if you have this planted in your garden and you really want to enjoy that fragrance, it really seems to become stronger in the evening time. Just kind of take a walk through and you will be rewarded. This plant has been treasured for generations and generations in the Southern Appalachians. People have been digging this up and planting it by their homes for years. The list of common names is just, it's so long. And also has a really nice yellow fall color. It is deciduous. Most of the shrubs I'm going to be talking about today are deciduous. We do have a few evergreens, you know, rhododendrons, laurels and stuff, but the vast majority of our plants do lose their leaves. But again, a really nice yellow fall color. A little bit brighter if it's in a sunnier area. But this is another plant. You can put it in the shade, you can put it in the sun, you can put it just about anywhere, and it's going to do fine. It gets a little bit bigger. It's a robust grower. It gets to be about 6 feet tall. It takes pruning really well. You know, if you want to, you could always go back and prune it back, and it'll just grow back even denser. But it's just really easy to grow. I mean, it really is. I see landscapers putting this in parking lots all over North Carolina right now, and it's thriving. So any plant that can survive in a parking lot is a pretty tough plant. This one's always recommended. And Sweetspire is another one. This is another plant that landscapers more and more, you see it, they've got it planted right along Main Street in Hendersonville. It's just right there in the toughest spots that a landscaper has to work with. Right along the street, you have pollution, you have extremes in heat and cold, you have a lack of water sometimes, just really awful, awful planting situation. And you see Sweetspire, and it's beautiful. It's covered in flowers in May, it's fragrant, it attracts butterflies, and it's just as beautiful as it is tough. So this is a plant, there are some newer selections that max out around the 3 to 4 feet tall. They're the dwarf ones. The species is pretty big. It gets to be about 6 or 7 feet tall. So if you have space for a larger one, you can just plant the species. Or Henry's Garden is also a really nice selection. It's a larger selection, but it just has even more flowers and even nicer fall color. But there are some dwarf ones available that only stay to 3 to 4 feet, which, you know, will fit in the garden a little bit better. This is another one though. You can put it in the sun, you can put it in the shade, you can put it just about anywhere, and it's going to do fine. It'll flower in the shade. You can see the foliage is just stunning in fall, and this is one of the, as far as the deciduous shrub, this is one of my favorites because it holds on to those leaves clear into January most years. And my plants at the nursery, it'll be all sticks, and then I've got the Sweetspire, and it's just still beautiful this time of year. So it retains that burgundy foliage really late, and that's definitely an asset when you have mostly deciduous shrubs. But it's another one that you see it growing in the wild. It's an understory. Most, you know, I mean, it's a shrub. It likes shade, but it was taken out of the shade, put in a wide variety of situations, and it's just proven to be extremely durable. So this is a plant you can put anywhere. The flowers are really lovely too. They have a really light sort of honey fragrance to them, and it's just a truly beautiful shrub. So let's see. This one. We have a lot of native St. Johns Worts to the area. There are over 1,000 types of St. Johns Worts, shrubs, large, small shrubs, herbaceous plants. They're all over the place. This is probably my single favorite shrub that is native. It's a St. Johns Wort. It's a Hypericum frondosum. The leaves are really beautiful. I don't know if you can quite tell. They have sort of a bluish sort of tint to them during the growing season. In mild winters, they will actually retain some of the leaves. So it's considered semi-evergreen, but you know, once it gets down into the teens, it's going to shed most of its leaves. The main thing about this plant, it is just the most drought-tolerant plant ever. I see it planted. I have customers on Glassy Mountain, and they have it planted on dry, exposed mountaintops, and it does fine. It doesn't require any supplemental watering once it's established. If you just have a really tough area of your landscape that just is out, it's away from the hose, and it's sunny and it's dry, you can plant this and it's going to do just fine. Sort of on its own, it makes a nice little mound. That's the shape that it makes. It doesn't require any sort of pruning or anything. Just makes a nice little 3 to 4 foot by 3 to 4 foot mound. In areas where you can see the bark is actually quite beautiful. So it's not the worst thing when the leaves fall off, because the bark is this beautiful silvery sort of exfoliating with this cinnamon brown color underneath, and it's just absolutely gorgeous, especially this time of year. I'm a real bark person, so I really appreciate the beauty of the bark. But the flowers are a main thing, especially for any of us who are concerned about our native pollinating insects, our native bees. They love this plant. When it's flowering, you can just, the bees, it's like a bee buffet. They absolutely love it. And you know, the bees need all the help that they can get. So this plant, did you have a question? Okay. This plant, it's just tough. It's great for the insects, and it is beautiful. It blooms for about 3 weeks in June. The solid 3 weeks, that thing is just covered in yellow flowers. They just keep coming day after day, and it's just extremely drought tolerant. So, you know, trouble spots in the garden, put this there, and you'll be rewarded with a nice pop of color in June, and the bees will thank you.
Does it grow in the shade at all?
It is not shade tolerant at all. It could possibly do a half day of sun. Most of the shrub hypericums, they need sun. They need dry and sun. You know, if you give them too much moisture or too much shade, they're gonna struggle a little bit. But now moving into some perennials that are really, really just noted for their toughness. Solomon seal, we're probably all familiar with this plant. I see this growing, I have two types of ecosystems on my land. I have the top, it's a really dry ridge. I have mountain laurel, I've got the sweet shrub, and I've got Solomon seal everywhere, just coming out of these really dry, horrible areas. And it's just thriving, it's just doing wonderful. And it just, but it's, again, it's very adaptable. You can put it really just about anywhere, except it needs the shade. It really, really wants the shade. It is not gonna want a full day of sun. You put it in the sun and it's just gonna wither. But it's not a shady area. Most of my customers in North Carolina have shady parts of their garden, if not an entire shaded garden. The Solomon seal is just, it's kind of a necessity. It really is. It's easy to grow. It's really lovely. There's a really beautiful variegated variety that's available. And once it's established, it just doesn't need much, you know? You don't have to keep going back and messing with it for it to be just absolutely gorgeous. The way that the branches, how they arch, it's just a really picturesque plant. So that's one, we probably have all seen this blooming around. It's one of the more common wild plants. Oops, back. So native grasses. You know, native grasses are becoming really, really popular again, which is great because for, you know, a couple generations now, we've really been focusing in on these perfect little lawns and all these crazy invasive grasses that we just bring in, and they need to look perfect all the time, and now they're showing up all over the place, and they're pushing out the native grasses. So if you have an area where you don't mind if it grows up a little bit and it doesn't need to be mowed, I would really, really recommend our native grasses. They come in a whole range of textures and colors and sizes. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the pink muhly grass. They really plant that a lot around western North Carolina. This one I believe is Shenandoah. That's our switchgrass right here, the maroon one. That's its color that it starts to get in the fall. It's just absolutely beautiful. And switchgrass, that is a tough plant. I work with the Forest Service down in Sumter a lot, and they plant that thing in just the most dry, exposed areas that have been cleared out, and they come through with switchgrass seeds, and they start the succession. They start with a grassy area, and the plants just take off. I mean, they don't even go back and water them, and they just thrive. So switchgrass, if you have an area that's, you know, really dry, sort of a tough location at the edge of the property, the switchgrass is a great one. There are a number of really beautiful selections out there. Shenandoah is one of my favorites. That burgundy color is really exceptional. And I believe that is the one down at the bottom is a selection of our little blue stem. I'm not sure which it is. There are a number of different varieties, but even just the straight species, the little blue stem, these are really important to the wildlife as well. But again, you know, they're in the durable section for a reason. These plants are tough, especially if you start with a plant. You get that thing planted, you maybe watch it for that first growing season. After that, you do not need to do a thing to it. If you want to, you can come through and cut it back after, you know, in winter time, or you don't have to. You don't really have to do much of anything, and it'll just sort of do its thing. And just really, really tough. But a lot of people think native grasses, and they just have these ideas of the things on the side of the road, and they're not too ornamental, but it's good for the birds. But we really, truly do have some ornamental ones that are worth seeking out.
Do the deer like them?
You know, I'm not sure about that. I actually have not had any reports. I get so many reports about shrubs being eaten by deer. I'll have to do, yeah. Most of these grasses are going to want a fair amount of sun. They could possibly do a half day. They probably wouldn't want anything less than 5 or 6 hours of sun. I feel like the muhly grass I see planted in areas where there's sometimes more of like a bright dappled shade for part of the day, and that seems to be acceptable. You know, the switchgrass and the little blue stem, those really want sun. They'll do okay. They just won't really, you know, mature to the size that they need to be. They might be a little lankier in the shade, but you put them in the sun and they're really gonna fluff out.
I think the river oats would probably take it more shade.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the river, and that's another great one. I should probably try to get that one in there. That's a really good one. Let's see. So, one part of the landscape that a lot of us struggle with and that we need really durable plants for is a ground cover. We have these huge expanses of area that are just mulched in the garden, and mulch is fine. Mulch needs to be replaced every year. And so there's a definite need for durable ground covers. Green and gold is one of my favorite of all of them. It's relatively easy to find in the industry. Once you get it planted, it sort of spreads on its own. It's really easy care. It is a shade plant, so this is something that, you know, it's not a ground cover for the sun. But if you have a shadier area where you'd just like to fill in the ground instead of having to replace that mulch every year, green and gold is just about as easy care as it gets, really. You get it planted, it spreads out, it establishes. Usually recommend with stuff like this, if you're starting, you know, a lot of times you'll find these either in a quart size or a gallon size, with that size, with a spacing of maybe, I don't know, 1 foot to 1.5 feet apart, and that'll fill in, and you'll just have this really lovely carpet of green and gold. It blooms for a good amount of time, mid to late spring. It has really pretty little yellow flowers, but it's there. The green and gold is the stuff I have at the nursery in containers is still green, and we got down to, you know, we got down in the single digits following this last storm. So there's still some foliage there in the containers. So it's not just gonna completely go away in the wintertime. You'll have a little bit of green there on the ground, and really just great for holding that soil together and filling in around plants. Doesn't get too tall, really just a short, cute little plant that I could not recommend more for filling in around shrubs and possibly underneath trees. You don't want to put it underneath a tree that's a really thirsty tree. You don't want to plant this underneath a red maple or something like that. But underneath most, you know, smaller ornamental trees or in a shrub planting, this would be great to fill in around the plants. And Bearberry. Now this is the sun ground cover. And this plant, this reaches its southernmost native range right here in the mountains of western North Carolina. So I actually don't even sell this to my customers in the Piedmont area and in South Carolina. This is a plant that I grow and keep in stock just for western North Carolina. Lovely evergreen leaves. You got the little white flowers in spring, followed by the red berries in fall. Just a really picturesque little ground cover, and it is just as tough as can be. Landscapers use this a lot on dry, hot slopes where nothing else will take, where you really just want to get that ground cover to establish. Bearberry is the one. You want a no-mow slope that's right there in the sun, really exposed. Bearberry, landscapers use it extensively, and the word is getting out. And I've noticed this year that more and more landscapers, especially in this area, they're going crazy for it because it works. It's kind of a trouble spot to have a ground cover in a really hot and dry area that's going to be evergreen and have flowers and has got it all, really. So if you have a spot like that, that's, you know, just a really tough place to get plants established, definitely check out Bearberry. It's a northern plant. It goes all the way up into, I believe, the border of Canada. So it's got a huge native range, and it just comes right down to here, and it's just easy to grow. It really is. It's a lovely plant, and definitely one to consider for hot, dry, exposed areas.
But it can be shady.
It can. It gets it can do a little bit of shade. From what my experience, it gets a little bit less dense in the shade. So the ground cover effect. It's kind of more like how partridge berry grows in the shade, where it's not like a dense mat most of the time where you find it. It's a little bit more spread out. If you put it in the shade, it can do a part shade. It's just going to not be quite as dense as if it were in the sun. And in the full shade, it just might not, it might not grow as fast, and it might not, it definitely won't get as dense. Let's see. So moving on to plants with wildlife value, which again, a lot of these plants that I talk about, they kind of fit in both, in two or all three categories. It's kind of hard selecting which ones, but you know, they definitely, for the most part, will have, you know, defining characteristics that sort of set them apart. For wildlife value, obviously can't say enough about oaks. If you have room to plant an oak, I would always recommend planting an oak. White oaks are absolutely gorgeous, just beautiful trees, you know, even just as a tree, they're just lovely. We got the scarlet oak up top, which is probably the oak that I sell the most of, retail and also as wholesale. It's just that color. You really, as far as dependable fall color for an oak, the scarlet oak is just gorgeous. I have a wild one that grows right out my window from my living room, and it's the last tree to change colors in the fall, but when it changes, it's stunning. It's just truly that bright, and then it holds its leaves really bright like that, clear into December some years. When all the other leaves have gone, my scarlet is absolutely gorgeous still. So that's the one, if you're wanting to plant an oak and you really want to have guaranteed fall color, go with the scarlet oak. And of course, beech trees. Beech trees, the beech nuts, I mean, the wildlife value on that tree is it's just over the top. And they're just gorgeous trees. I have a bunch of wild ones. They do like moisture. They do grow in lower areas for the most part. So the beech, you're not going to want to plant somewhere that you'd plant a red maple. You're going to want to plant it somewhere where you can, you know, water it as it's getting established, and somewhere that isn't too hot and dry while it's getting established. But once it gets going, it's one of the most beautiful trees. It's got that white bark. But the oaks and the beech tree, as far as large canopy trees, you know, you can't really beat them for wildlife value. They're just truly, you know, stately trees. Moving into smaller trees, and this one was really hard to pick for wildlife value because it is so beautiful. It just is. It's one of my top selling trees, the Serviceberry. There are many, many types of Serviceberries. There are hybrids of Serviceberries. They're all over the place. For the most part, a Serviceberry is a Serviceberry. You're going to have a multi-trunked small tree or a large shrub. There's one variety that is a single trunk. It's a little bit harder to find. But, you know, for the most part, you're going to have the multi-trunk, just covered in flowers, early spring, even before the dogwoods, followed by the fruit in June. It's also called Juneberry. It's really delicious. You just eat it off the tree. It kind of tastes like a blueberry almost. Really, really yummy. And then most Serviceberries will give you a really nice fall color. If you like attracting birds to your yard, definitely plant a Serviceberry. The habit of the tree is perfect for them to get in there and have sort of roosting spots. They go crazy for the berries. If you're trying to harvest the berries for yourself, you definitely want to use a net because the minute, and it's funny because they'll sit there, and then the minute that they ripen, the birds will just swoop in. They just know, it's like they've been waiting. So, I mean, a lot of people plant this to harvest for themselves. The edible native plant movement is very strong in Western North Carolina. And so I'd say the vast majority of people I know that buy this want to eat the berries, process the berries in some way, make jam, make pie. You can make all sorts of things with certain berries, but it is also extremely ornamental as well. Also a really good source of nectar, early spring source of nectar for bees. Not a lot of things are flowering right there at that time of year, and that's a really good one for that. Sourwood. Really couldn't have a discussion about wildlife-friendly plants that are native to the area without talking about sourwood. We are all familiar with sourwood honey. Just truly a beautiful plant. You know, you see it growing in the wild and it gets pretty huge. We've got canopy-sized sourwoods on our property that are gigantic. In the landscape, for the most part, they don't get that big. When you plant it somewhere, they kind of max out after maybe closer to 30 feet, maybe a little bit bigger. They don't get as big as they would as when they're in the wild. And it's truly just a stunning specimen tree. It really is. I feel like it's not planted enough. Has a really long bloom time right there in summer. It's got flowers on it for about a month. And it holds seed capsules that it forms. So when you get the fall color, you have this really just interesting this texture of the seed capsules sort of nestled on top of the burgundy foliage. And it's just absolutely stunning. It's one of my favorite trees. I really can't grow enough of them. In fact, I'm sold out of these right now. I had a guy come and buy all the rest of them, all 50 of them, to plant at a church property down in South Carolina. He'd been looking forever, and can have a little sourwood forest, I guess. But definitely one of my top selling plants. It's hard to find for some reason. I don't know why. So encourage your local nurseries to be growing this one, because it's just beautiful, and we should really be planting it more. The bees, our honeybees, need all the food they can get. And also on that note, I don't spray any sort of pesticides or anything on my plants at my nursery. Is another thing I would maybe encourage to talk to your other nurseries about. If you want to plant things for the bees, try really hard to find plants that have been produced without pesticides sprayed on them, because that's kind of, you're like luring them to their death. So seek them out. I know a lot more places. Yeah.
One of my cousins told me the reason we don't have so many sourwood trees in our area, and I'm talking about the dark corner,
Yep.
is because the people who moonshine love the wood of the sourwood, because it's good, slow growing.
Oh, wow.
Better real wood, and it was
That's-
choice firewood.
That's so interesting, because I'm in the dark corner. And we love the moonshine lore, so that's really cool.
I don't know the truth to it, but that's what I was told, that he's part of the family that should know.
Wow, that is really cool. Gosh, well, thank you. I'm going to remember that, because that is a really interesting note. I have, being in the dark corner, I don't see a whole lot of them. We have this really neat little cove forest that just was forgotten by time, it seems like. I don't know, it's on this really steep hill. And so we're really lucky. We have a few out there, but I don't really see them until I get up into North Carolina, and then I see them in the roads and stuff. And that's really cool. I'm gonna have to go back and tell the people of the community that they'll be interested.
So what was the name of that church?
Oh gosh, they were in Columbia. It was a Presbyterian church. I know, seriously. The guy, he was a pastor. He seemed honest enough, but you never know. They have a very happy congregation. Moving on to other trees that have really good wildlife value. Again, I was torn. Our magnolias, they really deserve to be in the ornamental category. They really, really do. But gosh, the birds really love the fruit. And I really felt like they deserved a spot. You see at the botanical gardens, they have some giant native magnolias. And when they have a good fruit set, you go there on the right day, and the tree is just alive with birds. And they're just drawn to it from all over. We have a lot of different native magnolias. You know, we have a whole range. We've got the Sweet Bay magnolia right there that stays a little bit smaller, a little bit more adaptable. It can do moisture, it can do dry, it can do sun, it can do shade. Sweet Bay magnolia is probably one of our most adaptable magnolias. And that one maxes out around 20 to 25 feet, so a little bit smaller. Then with the white flower up there at the top, that's a really small big leaf magnolia, and that is a part of our native big leaf deciduous magnolias that grow in the mountains here. We've got several different varieties. And those ones get really big. You know, those are canopy trees. They get gigantic. They've got the huge leaves. The big leaf magnolia, the true Magnolia macrophylla, actually has the largest single flower of any plant in the entire world. So when that thing's blooming, it's just spectacular. You know, most of our magnolias, for the most part, down there is a seed pod from the Magnolia tripetala, the umbrella magnolia, which is another of the large leaf deciduous magnolias. Those plants are going to get pretty big. You're going to need some space. You're going to want to have room for a 40 to 50 foot tree. If you don't have room for that, you know, there's always the Sweet Bay magnolia as an option. Sweet Bay is semi-evergreen. I was just visiting the garden yesterday for a consultation, and the Sweet Bay magnolia was a nice large specimen, and I'd say it still had about 3/4 of its leaves on it after reaching the teens recently. So, you know, and we of course have the southern magnolia. I didn't include a picture of that one because, I mean, it's everywhere. We're all familiar with the southern magnolia. We do have a lot of other really cool, unique magnolias that are native though as well, and they all truly serve a purpose in the diet of our native bird species. So there's always room for a magnolia, I feel like. They're just truly lovely plants. And for the most part though, you know, the Sweet Bay is adaptable. It can do moisture and dry. Our native big leaf magnolias, when you plant them in the landscape, you're just going to want to make sure there's not a lot of standing water. They don't want their feet to be too wet. They can be, you know, planted along fast-moving streams, as long as it's somewhere where the roots aren't going to be, you know, in a boggy type environment. They're fairly adaptable. I've seen success with the big leaf magnolias in a part shade area until it grew bigger. I've also seen them planted on forest edges, done really nicely. You can plant it as a specimen tree. There's a lovely big leaf magnolia at a customer's house that is just right smack dab in the middle of his lawn. The thing's huge now. And I mean, it's a lovely specimen tree. They are deciduous though, the big leaf ones, so that is something to consider. But when the leaves fall, it's really, really cool. You have these giant leaves. I mean, it can go either way. You know, if you appreciate the giant leaves all over the place, then it's really cool. Or it can be, you know, kind of a hassle. Something to consider before planting the big leaf magnolia. They do drop a lot of giant leaves. But our viburnums, we have a number of native viburnums. And I mean, as far as bird value, you really can't beat a viburnum. They're extremely ornamental as well. We have a whole range of different berry types. For the most part, the viburnums that we have that are native to this area are going to have some sort of white flower on them. Somewhat similar. The main difference would be the fruit and the size. A lot of viburnums get really big. We have dwarf varieties that are available. For most of the cultivars, right here, the Viburnum trilobum, the American cranberry bush, that is a really cool, I mean, those are big berries, and I actually recently found out that you can actually use them as commercial cranberries. You can actually harvest them and process them similar in a way that you do cranberries, and I guess that's, I read that in an edible book recently, which was really exciting. I always like to learn about ways that I can eat my landscaping. So it's a taste similar. They're kind of bitter. You wouldn't want to eat them right off the bush, similar to a cranberry. But if you do process them in some way, you pretty much have a cranberry. But the birds love them too. Most people plant viburnums for the birds. I don't know if I've actually ever met somebody who planted a viburnum to harvest for eating. You can eat most of the varieties though with some processing. The viburnum, nudum, winter thur, is a really wonderful, just beautiful viburnum. Again, both of these ones are going to get a little bit bigger. These are going to be 7-foot shrubs or so. The winter fir possibly a little bit bigger. But what's really cool about the winter fir are the multicolored berries. The berries sort of ripen over an extended period of time, and so you get this sort of rainbow of berries. It's really ornamental. And as they ripen, the birds, they just come on in. So with the cranberry bush, there is a dwarf variety available. It's called Bailey's Compact, and that one maxes out more around 3 to 4 feet, a little bit more appropriate for a normal landscape type setting. Another, most of our native viburnums have dwarves. We have our arrowwood viburnum that gets huge, 10-foot shrub, but we have a great selection of that is, oh gosh, I know I have emerald luster and blue muffin. Blue muffin is a great dwarf viburnum. It's the selection of our arrowwood. That one stays around 4 feet tall. I really encourage people to plant viburnums. A lot of the times, though, they just don't have room for the species. So if that's the case, seek out a dwarf cultivar and get a viburnum in there and watch the birds come. The flowers are very ornamental in sort of an old-fashioned way. They're not, with so many new types of plants constantly being introduced and the crazy flowers, I still appreciate the look of a viburnum flower. I still think it's quite lovely. And I think most viburnums are fairly adaptable. They can do a part shade, they can do like a bright dappled shade. Our arrowwood viburnum, you can put that thing in the sun and it's gonna do just fine. Most of these are gonna do good with morning sun, like the first half of the day exposure and possibly a little shaded in the afternoon. Or a really bright dappled shade too. But they'll put on better flowers and fruit if they have, at least about 4 hours of direct sun. Early or midday sun would be better. So hearts of bursting. This is another one. The birds go absolutely crazy for it. I've got this growing wild all over. This one likes moisture. This plant needs shade. So this is really, really good for gardeners who have shady areas in the garden where the soil stays a little bit moist. The main thing for this plant is the berries in the fall. I'm sure we've all seen this one. You see it growing all over. It's kind of it's a nice green, pretty little shrub. The flowers they're small. They're very inconspicuous. But when you get up close, there's something to appreciate. They're little yellow, sort of waxy looking flowers that line the branches. You really do need to get up close to appreciate it though. The main thing though is the seeds in the fall. And you start to get that pink capsule developing and then it bursts open and you've got those neon orange seeds inside. Oh my goodness, my fall sales that I vend at, when I bring these and they're covered in seeds, people are just tripping over themselves to find out what it is. And it's great for the birds. Mm-hmm.
I learned something recently about parts of us that I was wondering why I didn't have it in my woods.
Yeah.
And it's a very common plant.
It is. They do like it.
And so if you have high density of deer, then have this plant because they eat it completely.
Definitely. Thank you. That is a really good note. Deer do love hearts of bursting. They do. And there are certain things, also viburnums, occasionally I have deer visit my nursery and for the most part they go right to the viburnums, they go right to the hydrangeas. They do love hearts of bursting. So if you do, if you have a lot of deer coming through the area, they will probably be drawn to this plant. If you don't, another thing about this that is worth noting is that you will occasionally find them sprouting up. The birds do love them. They eat them and then they fly all over the property, and that's how it is typically such a common plant. So you would just need to be prepared for a little one popping up every now and then. You can always dig it up and move it to a different spot, or dig it up and share it with a friend. Or it's not prolific by any means. You know, you're not going to turn around and you're just going to have hundreds of them. But it is worth noting, you know. So, but it's tough to find that nice plant that's going to do great in the shade and really give a nice pop of color. So that's a good one if you don't have too many deer, and if you're willing to have occasional seedlings pop up every once in a while. Sort of a loose sort of shrub, gets to be about 4 to 5 feet tall. Nursery propagated, you'll start with a denser shrub. I prune mine so they have sort of a nice dense habit, so that way when you start out with it, you have a nice dense shrub. In the wild, they're really loose and sort of open. So if you do move one and you want to get it, you can just prune it back and it'll grow back denser. They take pruning really well. Spice bush. So of course, have to talk about spice bush. Really, really important. We're all really worried about the butterflies right now. I just really encourage people to plant spice bush if they can. If you have a spot where you can fit in a spice bush, just please plant it. They're pretty easy care plants. They really are. They do like shade. They like to be, you know, in a dappled shade. I really feel like the flowers are quite ornamental, you know. Flowers right at the same time as the forsythia. So you got that yellow early spring. It's kind of my native substitute for forsythia. Not nearly as bright and ornamental, but it's right there at that same time. And it's, you know, we need to be planting this. As our habitat disappears and these plants are not being replanted, you know, with the butterflies, there are two of them. There's the spice bush swallowtail, and another swallowtail that depend on this completely for their life cycle. And if they don't have it, no more butterflies, you know. So it's a really important one, really easy to grow as long as you give it shade, get it nice and mulched. You got the flowers, you have the really cool berries, the bright red berries. And then you also, which the birds love. So it's kind of a double whammy, you know. You got the butterflies, you got the birds. It's like an everything plant. And the birds love the berries. And then you have a really nice yellow fall color. Just a great, easy to grow shrub. It does get a little bit bigger, around 6 feet tall. Unfortunately, there aren't any new cultivars, dwarf ones of this available, so you would need to have room for a 6-foot shrub. It can get larger if you have really, really nice soil, really deep, loamy soil. You know, it can get bigger, but for the most part, it's going to max out around 6 feet. But just a really important plant for our region's ecosystem, and thankfully, lots of people are planting it. It does like moisture. You know, I would always recommend just keeping it nice and mulched. It's one of those plants, while it's getting established, you want to, you know, keep it watered. If we go over the summer and we go through a droughty period, get some water on it, and just keep a nice thick layer of mulch over it, and keep that root system nice and cool and nice and moist. Or if you have a stream, it's also really happy by streams also. So of course, the butterfly weed. Moving into herbaceous plants, you know, we can't plant enough of these. And I mean, honestly, we're selling out. Every nursery that I worked with last year, we all sold out of every type of butterfly milkweed that we grew. It was just gone. There's more that's becoming available right around now and over the next couple months, getting ready for the spring season. Then I know that a bunch of the commercial larger growers, they really ramped up their supply of the butterfly weed because everybody wants it and everybody's wanting to grow it. It's amazing how ornamental it is and that it's not planted more often. It's amazing that it would get to this point where it's this scramble to plant this, when this is really one of the most, all of these are just stunning plants. Really a great addition to any perennial planting. And, you know, I guess the hard thing is that they have been traditionally hard in the industry. So that is changing, and they're going to be more and more available. And, you know, everybody has space for a little clump of milkweed. They don't take up too much room. They're fairly easy to care for. And, you know, depending on the species of butterfly, they each have certain associations with certain plants. I know the orange one, the tuberosa, the orange milkweed, that one's planted a lot. The incarnate, I mean, really all three of these would be good for the native butterfly species in our area, and they're all extremely ornamental. And these ones, for the most part, are fairly easy to find. We've got close to a dozen native milkweeds. Some of them get a little more obscure, but these ones are ones you should be able to find relatively easy, and they're pretty easy to care for. So always have room for milkweed. And Joe Pye weed, of course. Now this is the towering one. We've all seen it. You know, thankfully, most of us really don't have room in our perennial border for a 6-foot tall plant. When you do, it's absolutely amazing. There's the most beautiful wildlife garden in, it's in Boone, I think, and they just have the most amazing, it's all natives and it's all wildlife themed, right there in the middle of Boone, and they have the most stunning perennial section with the Joe Pye weed in the back and all the stuff in the front, and it is just, if you have the space, it really is just a lovely plant. Thankfully, there are dwarf ones available. Little Joe is the most common one that is available at most places. And that one, that stays maybe somewhere between 2 and 3 feet, much more usable in a traditional type setting. You get this thing, I have them grown at the nursery, and there are just dozens of butterflies. Like, you can't keep them off. So that's one, if you like to see butterflies flying around your yard, definitely try to find a space for the Joe Pye weed. Really easy to grow. I mean, this thing will just grow, You don't really have to care for it much once it's established, but it really, truly will draw the butterflies in. Same with the swamp sunflower, not with the butterflies, but with the wildlife value. This plant is really, really important. There's actually an interesting relationship with the sunflowers and the birds. They really like the seeds, of course. They love the wild sunflower seeds. But if you have an area where you can just kind of let a big patch of the sunflowers grow, the bugs that are drawn to the sunflower, the birds just know between the bugs and the seeds, they're going to get a meal on this plant, and they just kind of hang out there. If you have an area where there are trees around, and then you have a patch of our native swamp sunflower, really many of our native sunflowers, you will be seeing birds. There's no doubt about that. There's a certain type of bugs that are drawn to it. The birds they get in there and they love it. So if you have the space, this is a big plant. This is another one of our massive perennials, 6 feet tall. The swamp sunflower is just one of our most durable ones. It's called swamp sunflower, but it's adaptable to just about anywhere. This is probably my top selling native sunflower just because of its adaptability. And you're just guaranteed that nice late season color. And most things have sort of started dwindling down. You've got the sunflowers blooming in late summer, early fall, and that's definitely an asset to have that bright yellow in there at that time of year. So moving on to plants with exceptional ornamental qualities, of course have to talk about the flowering dogwood. The dogwoods are definitely in trouble in our area. Anthracnose is a pretty big problem. I heard one lady who just recently wrote a book. She was talking to folks like Mike Durr, and all these big plants people are predicting that within the next generation or two that all the wild dogwoods could be gone. So that's kind of a concern. There are a lot of breeding efforts being focused on disease-resistant dogwoods, trying to really get them out there. The white flowered dogwood the only white flowered one that I sell is actually a selection, Appalachian Spring. This was a plant that they found wild, actually. It wasn't one through all these crazy breeding efforts. They came up with some really cool ones. Appalachian Spring was found growing wild. It showed extreme resistance to anthracnose. They took some cuttings, they brought it into the lab at one university in Tennessee. They did a bunch of testing on it, they grew it up, and it has proven to be just about 100% anthracnose resistant. It is a really tough dogwood. Dogwoods are plagued by many diseases, and the Appalachian Spring, it just doesn't seem to bother it as much. And people will say, oh, well, just plant the Asian dogwood, they're completely resistant. But no, it's not the same. And the Appalachian Spring, powdery mildew doesn't bother it. A lot of the problems that just make dogwoods suffer, the Appalachian Spring, it does not have those problems. And the extreme disease resistance is a huge asset to this plant. So if you really want to plant a dogwood, seek out Appalachian Spring. There are several white flowered varieties that are available on the market, and they have good disease resistance. That one it's just amazing. So that one's really tough. Also, the Cherokee Brave for people who like the pink, the red flowered dogwoods. There are a bunch of them available. Cherokee Brave is the most disease resistant of them. When it comes to promoting dogwoods, that's kind of the main thing I look for is disease resistance. Which plant is going to last the longest in the garden without problems, that's actually going to thrive. So those are the two that would be worth seeking out if you want to plant a dogwood somewhere on your property. And of course, the red buckeye. Again, this is one that could sort of transition into the wildlife value as well, but it is just so beautiful and it's just not planted enough. It's one of those, I don't understand, it's so gorgeous. It's like it just got overlooked at some point in the history of the evolution of gardening, and we never kind of went back to it. It's definitely gaining popularity right now. I mean, the flowers on this thing are gigantic. It flowers at a really young age. I've had 1 gallon, foot tall trees put on a flower. All of my 3 gallons flower. So really at a young age, you're rewarded. The flowers are up to a foot tall in cases on a mature tree. And it's just stunning. You plant it in the full sun like that, and it has a really, the red buckeye does like moisture. You normally see it growing in a shadier area. Brought out into the full sun, you just keep it nice and mulched, keep that water on it for that first year while it's getting established, and it really creates just this dense, just absolutely amazing plant. When it is in flower, it's just jaw-dropping. There's a really nice planting at the French Broad River Garden Club headquarters in Asheville. It's in South Asheville, right there off the Hendersonville Highway. If you ever go out there, try to get out there in May. It's planted kind of near the back, and you can just see how gorgeous it is when it's put in the sun and it's cared for. It is one of our most ornamental plants. And you can see it attracts hummingbirds, which is always a plus. We always like plants for hummingbirds. Never get tired of seeing them in the garden. But it also does great in the shade. Most of the time that you actually see this plant, and actually where I have several seed sources for this plant all across Western North Carolina, every single one of them is planted in the shade. And they get just as big. It's not quite as dense in the shade, but it still flowers prolifically under the canopy. So if you have a shady garden and you have room for a small tree, definitely consider the red buckeye. You will not be disappointed. Those flowers, they're just one of the most ornamental flowers on any tree I've ever seen, and it's really surprising that it's not planted more. Possibly because it does need that little bit of extra moisture in the beginning while it gets established, but just keep it well mulched, and it is just a lovely, lovely tree. And of course, the fringe tree. This plant, I can't grow enough of them, really. I just can't. I grow them and I keep increasing how many I grow each year, and people come through and I'm sold out by the end of spring. Another plant that flowers really, really young. My 1 gallon plants will usually have flowers on them. My 3 gallon plants sometimes are just completely covered. A giant puff, a cloud of flowers. Just absolutely gorgeous. You got the separate male and female. So a lot of times, the plants that I'm working with in the 3 gallon size, I don't know what they are. The males have a bit showier flowers. I have had on occasion specimens in 3 gallons that were just so covered in flowers, we just assumed they had to be males. I mean, it was just insane. But that being said, the females do still flower a lot also. And if you plant the female, and there's another fringe tree in the area, you get those blue berries that are actually edible. It's a member of the olive family. You can eat them. You can process them. A little bit different than, a traditional olive, but it is edible. The birds absolutely love them though. So either way, you're gonna win. If you got the male, you're gonna have a really over-the-top flowering. If you got the female, you're still gonna have that flowering, but you're also gonna be rewarded with the berries that the birds just go nuts for. And this is a really tough plant. They have one planted at the parking lot at the Asheville Botanical Gardens. And again, anytime I see a plant that is thriving in a parking lot, that goes on the list of tough plants. It's fairly adaptable. It's a wonderful tree. There's and I need to know the name of the mountain. There's a mountain somewhere not too far from Pisgah, and a whole side of it is covered in wild fringe trees. And when you go there in May, the whole side of the mountain is just white and sort of, it's just billowing with the, it's lovely. And I need to remember the name of it because I would love to be able to tell people how to get there. But plant one in your yard, you know, plant one as a specimen tree right in the lawn. It is really that gorgeous. And it's small, you know, it's not too big. It's not going to take over your planting area. It's a nice compact size, slower growing. It's not a particularly fast growing tree. But it definitely, but it flowers young. So you can start with a young one and you're still going to have flowers while you watch it mature. But just a wonderful plant. It has pretty decent yellow fall color on it as well. So, you know, again, if you plan for fall color and you plant it somewhere next to something that has a contrasting color, you're really going to get a nice look there. And let's see, our silver bell. I mean, this tree, this is another one that is just so ornamental and so beautiful. We have three different, one of them is just plain not available in the trade. We have two different ones that are available for the most part at nurseries. We have the Carolina silver bell and we have the two-winged silver bell, which is also called the Piedmont silver bell. They're both fairly similar. In the landscape, for the most part, after feedback from professionals and lots of research, the two-winged silver bell is a little bit more durable. Carolina silver bell, I grow both of them because I get some people, they really want the Carolina silver bell, and that's just the one they want. So I grow them both. But the two-winged silver bell is just a little bit tougher. Both of them are really going to need an eye on the moisture while they get established, or plant it by a stream if you have one somewhere where there's moisture. This is a bottomland species, both of them, whether it's in the Piedmont or the mountain, they grow near moisture. So you can take it out of that setting as long as you keep it watered while it's getting established and keep it nice and mulched. And you can see that that one right there on the left is that's the two-winged silver bell. I believe that is a selection magniflora. It's the large flowered two-winged silver bell. That's about as big as it's going to get, about 30-35 feet, bigger than a dogwood. It's about a medium-sized tree. But you can see down on the bottom corner there, that is the same selection. That's magniflora. But that's it when it's young. It literally drips with flowers. My 3-gallon ones, I always try to put up pictures in the spring because my 3 gallons, they'll be just covered in these beautiful bell-shaped flowers. And they flower prolifically from a young age. So you're really rewarded early on with the silver bell. There is a pink flowered one available. It's not the toughest plant. It always stays around. I believe it's called Arnold's Pink. Really pretty. People are drawn to it. They really want it. I'd say it's worth a shot, but I'd say it's probably a 50-50 chance. It's one of those plants that if you can get it to grow, it's beautiful, but it's not very tough. So just keep that in mind. If you see the pink silver bell and you really want it, you can try, but you may not be successful. That one's a little tough in the landscape, but it is quite lovely, so it is worth mentioning. I have known people who had success with it. So. Silver bells, though, are just lovely. Of course, our native azaleas. I could do an entire talk just on native azaleas. I really could. Easily my top selling plants right alongside dogwoods. Dogwoods and my native azaleas, you can't have enough in stock. You really can't. They're all beautiful. Our native azaleas are deciduous. They are rhododendrons. They are deciduous azaleas, though. But what they lack in leaves in the winter, they definitely make up for with flowers in the spring. And a lot of our native species are fragrant, which is really amazing. The evergreen ones, the fragrance isn't there. But I mean, Fragrant Star, this white one down at the bottom, oh my goodness, it almost smells like gardenias. When that thing's flowering and I have it out at plant sales, I see, and they're just walking and they're like, oh, what is that smell? And it's always the Fragrant Star. They find it and they pick it up and then they take it home. It's just an intoxicating fragrance. The good thing about the Fragrant Star also is that it's a little bit smaller. A lot of our native azaleas get really big. They want to be a large shrub, or some of them even a small tree. I mean, you see the wild flame azaleas sometimes, and they're gigantic. Fragrant Star maxes out around 3 feet. It is the smallest of our native azaleas that isn't some sort of hybrid. This is just the Rhododendron atlanticum. It's called the coastal azalea. But the coastal azalea, don't let the coastal fool you. This plant has a range from all the way up in the Northeast, all the way down to Texas. It experiences ecosystems from the top cold part of our country all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico on the coast of Texas. So this thing, it's adaptable anywhere. It really is. Most native azaleas are going to want, it's kind of half and half. Some of them are going to want really dry. The canescens, the pink one up there, which is our Piedmont azalea, and the Rhododendron ostrinum, which is the southern flame. You know, those are two that are examples that are really going to want a dry. Those are going to get a little bit bigger. Those max out around 6 feet or so. The Fragrant Star, that one it's adaptable. It can do dry or moist. You get some of them though, like a lot of the mountain natives. The sweet azalea is another white flowered one. That one's really going to want some moisture. It likes to be by a stream. So when you're selecting a native azalea, there's so many different types. If you ever want to, you could go to the library and check out this really cool book, American Azaleas. Just do a little bit of research, you know, because their planting requirements are kind of all over the gamut. You know, some of them really like dry, some of them really like moist. And as with all plantings, you know, if you can just figure out which one wants to be where you're trying to plant something, you're going to have more success. All three of these, though, just have an absolutely amazing fragrance. The pink and the yellow, the Piedmont and the Southern Flame, they bloom right there in early spring, before the leaves even come out. I've had them blooming in late March before, and it just fills the air with just the most amazing fragrance. You just want to kind of lay down and take a nap under it. It's really just, it's wonderful. So those two, you know, you got that early spring. The good thing about our native azaleas, though, is they have a bloom period from early spring. I have some that are blooming clear in July. Prunifolium, the plum leaf azalea, it's got red flowers. It blooms in July. So there's an azalea for every flowering season. And let's see, I'm sorry, I am running over now, so I'm going to go ahead and can't say enough about the azaleas, though. Oak leaf hydrangeas, the same, where most of us are familiar with these. You got the big flowers, you got the stunning fall color. That one down there at the bottom is a newer selection called Ruby Slippers. All oak leaf hydrangeas sort of age to that really pretty pink color. Ruby Slippers really gets like a deep burgundy color to the flowers. So that's a really cool one. That's kind of the direction that they're heading. I'm sorry. The deer have eaten this at my nursery. You know, that's usually it. They go to the drink when they come to the nursery to eat things. So not deer resistant. Comes in a whole range of sizes, though. You've got small ones at 2 to 3 feet, and you've got large ones, you know, up to 10 feet. So really any size that you could possibly need. Rhododendrons. We're all familiar with these. They make a lovely addition to any shade garden on any commercial or residential property. You guys are lucky because you can grow them. You're in Western North Carolina. My customers down in the Piedmont, they cannot, and they're always trying. Some of them have success, and you are very, very lucky that you live somewhere where you can grow these, because these are some of the most beloved, as well as the mountain laurel. And you know, the mountain laurel comes in a whole range of flower types at this point, really all over the place. You got the white, you got the pink budded that opens to a pink flower, and you've got the bullseye. So both of these really nice evergreen shade plants are something that you guys are lucky enough to grow here, and I would always encourage you to add these if you have the desire. They both like dry, you know, they don't want too much moisture, but they are lovely plants. And let's see, we have Fothergilla. This plant is really adaptable. You got the early spring flowers. You can see it just covered in flowers up there. And the fall color, you could almost plant this just for the fall color alone. It is really that gorgeous. A really dense sort of habit. It spreads from the bottom. Gets to be about 5 to 6 feet tall. There are more dwarf cultivars if you want something that stays a little bit shorter. Just really easy to grow. Great early spring source of nectar for bees. And then the fall color is just absolutely stunning. Love the Fothergilla. Doesn't really have a common name, so if you're looking for it, just ask for Fothergilla. Just a wonderful, easy to grow. It can do sun or shade. Really just adaptable plant. And you can put it just about anywhere. Let's see. So now heading into the perennials, we got bee balm. Bee balm is of course wonderful. It attracts hummingbirds. Really easy to grow perennial. Definitely always try to keep this one in stock because it's a staple in the garden, even if you're not focused on natives. A lot of these ones here at the end, are native irises. Just absolutely stunning. They like a little bit of shade, so you're gonna want, for the irises, you're gonna want a dappled shade environment, somewhere where it's, you've worked on the soil a little bit. They're not gonna wanna get planted in direct clay. Somewhere where the soil is a little bit looser, amend with some composted pine bark. But I mean, they're just gorgeous. They really light up a shady area. All three of these are fairly easy to find in the trade, so you shouldn't have too much trouble finding them if you're looking to add them. Used a lot by landscapers. They're almost used like ground covers in a lot of plantings that I've worked on. Let's see, Blazing Star is, the butterflies just go crazy for this thing. You have the late season, you've got the huge spire of purple, really easy to grow. I've got this planted in the driest, most exposed area where it just gets like 10 hours of sun and the thing just thrives and it puts up these flowers every year. The butterflies go crazy for it. And it's just a lovely plant. It's another one that I feel like I'll be seeing a lot more of outside of specifically native plantings. All of the liatris are very ornamental, but the Blazing Star is just stunning. And finally we've got native vines. So this is the last little section here. Wisteria, I know we're all familiar with the invasive Asian wisteria that's taking over the forests. The sad thing is that we have a native wisteria. It is our Native American wisteria, and it's grown in our backyard for forever. And it's not horribly invasive. The vine maxes out somewhere around 20 feet. It trains well to trellises. Flowers are a little bit smaller, and it doesn't grow quite as fast as the other ones. So I guess that's why it kind of got put on a shelf. But if you like wisteria, a lot of people really like that flower. Just seek out the native one. It's not gonna grow over your house or anything. It's a really well-behaved vine. And then we also have the jessamine and the native coral honeysuckle. All of these are gonna do really well in sun. The coral honeysuckle can do a little bit of shade. These all bloom in spring for the most part. And, most vines really like sun. Coral honeysuckle, there's a really nice planting at the Botanical Gardens in Asheville underneath the canopy, and it still flowers prolifically in a dappled shade type environment. And finally, my favorite vine is the cross vine. A lot of people are always asking for trumpet vine. Trumpet vine is one of our only native vines that is just completely rampant. It's beautiful, but it's just you can't really control it. I recommend cross vine. A lot more well behaved. It is sort of, it's really easy to get to grow on a trellis. Covered in these beautiful, almost tropical looking flowers. I've had 3-gallon plants with over 100 flowers on them. It blooms at a really young age and it just blooms prolifically. And it has its big show in early spring and it sort of blooms sporadically throughout the rest of the year. And it's easy to grow. The cross vine is one of our only native vines that has good drought tolerance. Once established, it really is very drought tolerant, which is fairly unusual for a vine. Usually those things need food and water to really take off. Cross vine doesn't, has good drought tolerance. And finally, for a really shady area down at the bottom is our native climbing rock hydrangea. It's native to the Great Smoky Mountains. You see it growing there in the complete shade, growing up rock faces. And even in the complete shade, you get these really pretty white hydrangea-looking flowers. Just a lovely vine for the shade. That one is self-clinging, so it grows up. Lovely plantings of it along like brick walls of houses, because it has a nice green foliage and you've got that white flower. So planted against something like brick, it sticks to it itself, and it's show-stopping. It really is. Good vine for the shade. So those are some of my favorite native plants.
Are native plants resistant to Japanese beetles?
Yes and no. Japanese beetles really like things, they really, the native azaleas, let's see, I'm trying to think, because this year was a really bad year for Japanese beetles at the nursery. For the most part, the one thing that they go to are the native azaleas, and I'm able to, I just put up traps, because I don't spray anything, but with a few well-placed traps in the area, I'm able to keep them off of my plants at the nursery. And those are available, I'm pretty sure, fairly easy online, or possibly at like garden centers around, little pheromone traps. And they work great, they all go there instead. The one year that I did not use them, my very first year, my azaleas, they went right to the native azaleas. And, when they're in big groups, they can really cause some damage. So use the traps if you can. But, yep.
What would you recommend for deer resistance? I live next to about 1,500 acres where they don't allow hunting. The deer population is enormous.
Yeah. There's a really cool place that I get to go visit deep in the mountains of North Georgia, and he has tons of deer, and he's been planting native plants for 30 years. And some of the plants that do really well there, the Fothergilla that I showed you a minute ago, he's got, they never touch that. Obviously the rhododendrons and the mountain laurels, for the most part, deer would have to be pretty hungry before they started eating that. One thing that I have on here, or that I don't have on here, that is a smaller tree that the deer don't really bug, are pawpaws. So if you have an interest in growing pawpaw fruit, deer do not mess with the pawpaws. A lot of the vines, they won't really bother. I'm pretty sure Summersweet, one of the very first ones that I covered, the Summersweet, I have not had any reports of that being decimated by deer. Let me look over this list really quick and try to think, because I get reports. I definitely do, and I try to catalog all that. The sweet shrub doesn't seem to be too bothered. I feel like that's a plant that they might nibble on, but they're not going to just completely eat your entire plant on the sweet shrub.
They seem to like 16 candles.
Do they? I know a lot of these are just kind of, the deer. Most of our native azaleas they won't for the most part eat things from the rhododendron species, so that might be a good place to start. And the Fothergilla, the pawpaws. If you can grow Florida anise up here, you can find a hardy variety of that. That's a really nice broadleaf evergreen plant that the deer do not touch. I'm trying to think of what else as far as shrubbery. Deer can be challenging. I've had people report that deer ate mountain laurel on their land one year, when that is a poisonous plant. And, it's, if the deer are hungry, they're going to eat. There are a few, and especially working with native plants, you might end up with most of these getting nibbled on a little bit. But some of them, like I said, if you have really high deer population, the hydrangea and the viburnums, they're going to go straight for those. So those would be ones that I would at least not recommend. I've had them come through and eat entire crops of oak leaf hydrangeas clear down to the pot. So those are definitely ones I would, not do. It's kind of tough, as I go year by year, I'm just trying to catalog plants that I know people have had success with. But I guess experiment.
I had an oak leaf hydrangea I had a dog up until about 2 years ago, and now the oak leaf hydrangea goes up and then sprouts.
Yeah, definitely, sort of like a tree, yeah. And you can train them like that too, or the animals can help you along with that. Yeah, the deer can be tough. I know I have customers sometimes who live in a really high bear traffic area, and they're always like, there are all these, nothing fruiting, and some people are like, give me blueberries, I want the bears. I'm like, when you live with the wildlife, it can be a challenge, to plant things that they're not just going to completely destroy, or that are going to attract them more than you already want them. But I would definitely check out the Florida anise. I grow a hardy variety of that. And that is a lovely underused plant, and the deer I've never heard of them ever even taking a single bite off it. So that would be one. That's not included in this. It's kind of borderline. You just really need to find a cold hardy. I have one that I grow that is from a Florida seed source, and I have one that I grow that's from a North Carolina seed source. So I have two different ones. I just am hesitant to openly recommend that to without, just make sure if you're going to plant that it's one from the area.
I know it'll grow in Spartanburg, but Spartanburg's not here.
Yeah. For Spartanburg customers, I would sell one from my Florida seed source, and it does just fine there. For the cold hardy one, I would use my North Carolina seed source one. Does anybody else have any questions?
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.